This mild and hot video assistance is for lesson 5 of chapter 2, where we're trying to find percent of change and percent error. So if you haven't watched the daily rewinds, if as you're watching this you have trouble, go back and watch that one first and then come back to this one. So if there's anything I say that you don't know and you feel like you should, that other video will explain it all for you. So if we start here, start by reading the directions. Is always a good place to begin. We're going to start, and it says find each percent of change. So that's your first clue that every single answer you put on these lines should be a percentage. It should not be an amount, it shouldn't be a number, it should be a percent. Then it says round to the nearest whole percent if necessary. So we're going to round to just the whole numbers, no decimals in our percents. And then it says state whether the percent of change is an increase or a decrease. So are we going up or down? So now we talked in class about how there's 3 steps to this process. You need to 1, find the amount of change. Number 2, divide it and see what the percent is, and 3, state your answer. So let's take a look at number 1. We went from 15 yards to 18 yards. So the first thing I'm going to do is right next to this, I'm going to write I for increase. The numbers went up, so I know I'm increasing. So now step 1 should look like this, and you should actually have this on your paper. Don't be lazy, don't call it mental math, just do it right. I'm going to say 18 subtract 15 equals positive 3. We went up 3 yards. So now the question is, what was the percent of change? So 3 yards is pretty meaningless because I don't want the number, I want the percent. So step 2 was to say, well, I increased 3 yards compared to, this is the ratio part, compared to how many yards I had when I started. How many yards did I have when I started? 15. So we have 3/15. Now at this point you can divide it on a calculator, or we can reduce the fraction and say that it's 1/5. We can use benchmarks to know that 1/5 is the same as 0.2, and 0.2 as a percent is 20%. So now step 3 I'm going to put up here on the blue line. And remember, we had to say it was an increase or a decrease and round to the nearest whole number. Well, we have the nearest whole number is 20%. So up here we're going to say that it's a 20% increase. So you've shown your work. So we set it up. That's the S, set up, solve, state. So we've hit all 3 S's for successes, and you're good to go. Let's look at number 2. 100 acres to 140 acres. Well, I can look at that in just mental math. I know that 140 minus 100 is 40. So I'm going to put an I next to here. And for number 1, I'm going to write that 140 minus 100 equals a 40-acre increase. And if you notice, I keep the units on so I don't forget where I'm at. Now step 2 is to figure out how 40 compares to the original amount. Well, I increased to 140, so my original amount was 100. So I put 40 over 100. Now we can drop the zeros. We know that it's 4/10, or we also know percents are always out of 100. So 40 out of 100 would be 40%. You may have gotten the decimal 0.4, and remember we move it 2 spots to the right, you still end up at 40%. So set up, solve, step 3 was stating our answer, and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say that it is a 40% increase. Alright? So now let's take a minute if we can, and let's look at one of the story problems where it's percent error, because it works similar to this. But let's scroll down the page, and let's look at number 7. Looks good. It says each week Mr. Jones goes to the grocery store. Mr. Jones estimates how much money he's going to spend when he gets there. He estimates that he's going to spend $120. Now remember, that's his estimate, not the real amount. When he goes, he actually spends $94. So again, step 1 is to look and say from 120 to 94, did he overestimate or underestimate? Well, 120 minus 94, if you use mental math, it takes 6 to get to 100 and 20 more to get to 120, which means he had a $26 overestimate. So he was $26 over his estimate. Now, step 2 is to set up your ratio. You take how much he was over, the $26, and we compare it to the actual amount. He actually spent $94. So we want to know what percentage 26 is of 94. So 26 divided by 94, if you go to your calculator, is going to give you 0.28, and 0.28 0.28 is a decimal. If we multiply by 100 or move it over, will give us our percent. So that's 28 hundredths. So we get a 28% error. So now step 3 is to come up here, and we have to state our solution. So we would say it's a 28% error. And again, the key to this is it's a little different than when we found the percent of change, because we take his overage, or what he was under by, and we compare it to what the actual amount was. So the only thing we use his estimate for was to find out how far he was off. After that, we use the actual value every time. Alright, so go ahead and complete either the hot or mild problems, and if you have questions, we will answer them tomorrow. Good luck.